200 passengers were screaming. Both pilots were dying. The plane was falling toward the ocean. Then a quiet woman in seat 32C stood up and said 5 words that made hardened soldiers freeze. This is Reaper. I'm flying. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The woman in seat 32C hadn't looked out the window once in 6 hours. Adrienne Kane kept her eyes forward. Hands flat on the armrests. Breathing counted, 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. The same technique she'd used before flying into enemy territory where one mistake meant starting a war. Except this was harder. Because in enemy territory, she had control. She had her hands on the stick. She had weapons, countermeasures, 8 years of training and 18 years of experience. Here, at 40,000 feet over the North Atlantic, she was just a passenger. Helpless. Trusting 2 strangers in the cockpit to keep her alive. Her therapist said this flight would be good for her. Face your fears, Adrienne. You can't avoid flying forever. The therapist didn't know that Adrienne had logged 4,000 flight hours in aircraft so advanced their names were classified. That she'd flown 186 missions into places that officially don't exist. That other pilots whispered about her in ready rooms like she was a ghost. The therapist only knew what Adrienne told her, former military, retired early, struggling with commercial flights. The therapist didn't know about the 78 people who died because Adrienne followed orders perfectly and the intelligence was wrong. That was 2 years ago. Adrienne walked away from flying and never looked back. Until today. British Airways Flight 117, London to New York. She'd stared at this ticket for 3 hours before forcing herself to board. Just 8 more hours. Then you never have to do this again. The businessman in 32D was typing furiously on his laptop. The mother in 32A was reading to her 2 children, voices soft and soothing. Normal people doing normal things at 40,000 feet. None of them knew that the quiet woman beside them had once been called the most dangerous pilot in the world. Adrienne closed her eyes and counted breaths. Then everything went wrong. The first sign was subtle. A flight attendant moving too fast through the cabin, smile too tight, eyes too wide. Adrienne noticed. Old training. She'd spent 18 years reading micro-expressions, spotting threats before they developed. Something was wrong. The flight attendant disappeared into the forward galley. 2 more attendants followed, voices low and urgent. Adrienne's pulse quickened. She forced it down. You're a passenger. Not your problem. Let them handle it. But her hands gripped the armrests harder. 10 minutes later, the cabin lights flickered. The smooth flight became unstable, minor corrections, nothing dramatic, but wrong. Adrienne felt the aircraft drift slightly off course. The seatbelt sign illuminated with a sharp ding. Then the intercom crackled. Not the captain's smooth, professional voice. A flight attendant, and she was barely holding it together. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a medical emergency in the cockpit. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. If there are any qualified pilots aboard the aircraft, please identify yourself to the cabin crew immediately. The cabin exploded. Screaming. Crying. Someone shouting, oh God, we're going to crash. Children wailing. Adults hyperventilating. The businessman next to Adrienne grabbed his phone with shaking hands, trying to send a last message to someone. The mother in 32A pulled her children close, whispering that everything would be okay even though her face said she didn't believe it. Adrienne sat perfectly still. Medical emergency in the cockpit. Both pilots. That's the only reason they'd ask for passenger pilots. Her heart hammered. Her breathing went shallow. Not from fear of death, she'd faced that 186 times, but from what they were asking. They need someone to fly. And Adrienne hadn't been in a cockpit in 2 years. Hadn't touched controls since the mission that killed 78 innocents. Hadn't trusted herself to keep anyone alive since the day she realized perfect execution meant nothing if the orders were poisoned. The flight attendant rushed past, face pale. Adrian's hand shot out and caught her wrist. What happened? I can't, we're not supposed to. Tell me. Now. Something in Adrian's voice cut through the panic. Command authority. The voice that had ordered men into combat. The flight attendant's composure shattered, both pilots. Food poisoning. The captain collapsed. I think it's anaphylaxis. The first officer is vomiting so badly he can't see straight. We asked for pilots 3 times and nobody's come forward and we're over the middle of the ocean and. Take me to the cockpit. Are you a pilot? Yes. Commercial. What's your license rating? Do you fly 777s? Because if you've only flown small planes. Adrian stood up. 5'7", unremarkable build, gray blazer and neat bun. But something about the way she moved made the flight attendant step back. Take me to the cockpit right now or everyone on this aircraft dies. Your choice. The flight attendant turned and ran forward. Adrian followed. Behind her, the businessman in 32D stared. Who the hell is she? The scene was worse than Adrian expected. The captain slumped in his seat, unconscious, lips tinged blue. Anaphylactic shock, severe allergic reaction, probably to something in the crew meal. The first officer bent over a sick bag, dry heaving, face green, barely conscious. Sweat poured down his face. The autopilot was engaged but the aircraft was drifting. Altitude decreasing slowly, 40,000 feet, down to 39,600. Course shifting south. Fuel levels adequate. Weather radar showed turbulence ahead. No pilot input. No corrections. In maybe 30 minutes, this aircraft would start dropping toward the ocean. The senior flight attendant, Margaret, name tag said, stood frozen in the doorway. Can you fly this? Adrian scanned the instruments with eyes that had analyzed threats at supersonic speeds. Boeing 777. Twin-engine widebody. Fly-by-wire controls. Glass cockpit. Similar to military transports she'd studied but never flown. I can fly. What's your experience with? I've flown 4,000 hours. Aircraft far more complicated than this. Now get both pilots out of their seats. Who are you? What airline do you? Adrian turned and looked at Margaret with eyes that had stared down enemy fighters in hostile airspace. I'm someone who's flown missions you can't imagine. Now move them or we all die. Margaret and another attendant dragged the captain from his seat. The first officer was semi-conscious, mumbling incoherently. They pulled him out too. Adrian slid into the captain's seat. Her hands found the controls instantly. Muscle memory. 2 years of not flying vanished in a second. Yoke. Throttles. Instrument panel. Everything where it should be. But her hands were shaking. Last time you sat in a cockpit, you killed 78 people. Adrian forced the thought down. Focused on the instruments. Altitude, 39,400 feet, still descending. Airspeed, 480 knots, stable. Fuel, adequate for Shannon, Ireland if they diverted now. Course, drifting 15 degrees off route. She took the yoke. Felt the aircraft respond to her touch. Heavy, sluggish compared to the fighters she'd flown, but steady. Predictable. You can do this. Physics is physics. Aircraft is aircraft. She keyed the radio, London control, this is British Airways 117. I am a passenger assuming control of the aircraft. Both pilots are incapacitated. I need immediate assistance. Silence. Then a stunned voice, British Airways 117, say again. Did you say a passenger is flying? Affirmative. I'm a former military pilot. I can fly this aircraft, but I need information. Nearest suitable diversion airport and current weather conditions. Stand by. The controller's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. Adrian waited. Adjusted course slightly, correcting the drift. The aircraft responded smoothly. Then a new voice cut in, older, authoritative, American accent. British Airways 117, this is Shanwick Oceanic Control, supervisor on duty. Please identify yourself fully and state your qualifications. Adrian hesitated. She hadn't used her military identity in 2 years. Hadn't wanted anyone to know who she was or what she'd done. But 200 people were depending on her. She keyed the mic and spoke the name she'd sworn never to say again. Shanwick Control, this is Colonel Adrian Kane, United States Air Force retired. Call sign Reaper. I have control of British Airways 117 and I need vectors to the nearest suitable airport immediately. The silence that followed lasted 5 seconds. It felt like 5 hours. Then, say again your call sign. Reaper. Colonel Adrian Kane. Now can we please focus on landing this aircraft before my fuel situation becomes critical? Another pause. When the controller spoke again, his voice had completely changed. From panic to something close to awe. Reaper. Actual Reaper. Colonel Kane, we have you on radar. Nearest suitable airport is Shannon, Ireland, 280 miles northeast. But Colonel, he hesitated. Are you qualified to land a Boeing 777? Adrian looked at the instruments. The massive aircraft under her hands. The 200 lives in the cabin behind her. I've landed aircraft in conditions you can't imagine. I'll land this one. Give me vectors to Shannon. Roger, British Airways 117. Turn right heading 045. Descend and maintain flight level 350. Colonel Kane, it's an honor. Save the honor for after we're on the ground. British Airways 117 turning right to 045, descending to flight level 350. Adrian banked the aircraft smoothly. The 777 responded like a dream, heavy but precise, sluggish but predictable. Behind her, Margaret stood frozen. You're Reaper. The Reaper. Right now I'm the only pilot on this aircraft. I need you to inform the passengers that we're diverting to Shannon and that everything is under control. But... Reaper. I've heard stories. You're a legend. The most decorated. Margaret. Adrian's voice was soft but firm. I need you focused. Can you do that? Margaret nodded, blinking back tears. Yes. Yes, Colonel. Then go. Keep them calm. When Margaret returned to the cabin, the panic had reached critical levels. People were crying. Praying. Writing goodbye messages on their phones. A man in row 15 was hyperventilating into a paper bag. Margaret grabbed the intercom with shaking hands. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Senior Flight Attendant Margaret Sullivan. I need everyone to listen carefully. We have a qualified pilot in the cockpit. A very experienced military pilot who has taken control of the aircraft. We are diverting to Shannon, Ireland, where we will make an emergency landing. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Who is it? Someone shouted. How do we know they can fly this plane? Margaret hesitated. Adrian hadn't said she could reveal her identity. But these people deserved to know. The pilot is Colonel Adrian Kane. Call sign Reaper. United States Air Force. For a moment, nothing. Confused faces. Then a man in row 18 stood up slowly. Retired military, based on his posture and the way his eyes went wide. Did you just say Reaper? Yes. Colonel Kane, call sign. Reaper. The man's voice was barely a whisper. "Oh my God. Reaper is on this plane." His wife grabbed his arm. "Who's Reaper?" The man turned to face the cabin, and his voice was steady now. "Reaper is a legend. The most decorated combat pilot in modern military history. She's flown missions that officially never happened. If Reaper says she can land this plane, she can land this plane." Another voice from row 22, a woman, also military bearing. "Reaper flew 186 missions. 0 losses. If she's in that cockpit, we're going to be okay." The panic didn't disappear. But it changed. People stopped screaming. Started watching the cockpit door like it might open and reveal something miraculous. The little girl in 32A looked up at her mother. "Mommy, is the lady going to save us?" The mother glanced at the empty seat beside her, 32C, where Adrian had been sitting. "Yes, baby. I think she is." In the cockpit, Adrian was working through a mental checklist. She'd never flown a Boeing 777 before. Never trained on commercial aircraft at all. Everything she knew was military, fighters, stealth bombers, special operations transports. But the fundamentals were the same. Lift, drag, thrust, weight. Angle of attack. Energy management. She could do this. "You killed 78 people last time." Adrian's hands tightened on the yoke. That was different. The intelligence was wrong. This time, the only variable is you. A calm voice crackled over the radio. "British Airways 117, this is British Airways Training Captain David Harrison. I'm a 777 instructor pilot and I'm going to talk you through the approach and landing. Are you ready to begin?" "Affirmative. I'm ready." "Excellent. Colonel Kane, first question, have you ever flown a commercial aircraft?" "Negative. Military only." "Understood. The 777 is fly-by-wire, so you'll find the controls responsive but heavily automated. What I need you to do first is familiarize yourself with the primary flight display. Do you see the artificial horizon?" "Roger. Artificial horizon centered, altitude 35,000 feet, descending." "Good. Now." A different voice cut in on the military encrypted frequency. A voice Adrian recognized instantly. "Reaper, this is Scepter Actual. Do you copy?" Adrian's blood went cold. Scepter Actual. General Marcus Hale. Her former commanding officer. The man who had ordered her to fly Operation Nightfall. She switched frequencies. "Scepter, this is Reaper. I'm in the middle of an emergency. What do you want?" "Colonel, you need to understand the situation. Your identity is now public. Every news organization in the world is broadcasting that Reaper is flying British Airways 117. That's a massive operational security breach. I'm saving 200 lives. Security can wait. Colonel, there are people in the Pentagon right now debating whether to let you land in Ireland. Your knowledge of classified systems, classified missions, there's an argument being made that you're too dangerous to allow back into any allied country." Adrian's voice went deadly calm. "Are you telling me they'd let 200 people die to protect secrets? I'm telling you to be prepared for complications. And Colonel." His voice softened. "I'm sorry. For Nightfall. For what we asked you to do. You deserved better." The transmission ended. Adrian sat in silence for 5 seconds. Her hands were shaking again. "They might not let you land. They might shoot down this aircraft to keep you from talking." Then she switched back to Shannon approach control and pushed the thought away. One problem at a time. Land the plane. Save the lives. Deal with the rest later. British Airways 117, Shannon approach. We have you on radar. Current distance 180 miles. Begin descent to 10,000 feet. Roger, Shannon. British Airways 117 descending to 10,000. The training captain's voice returned, Colonel Kane, I need you to reduce speed to 250 knots and extend speed brakes. There's a lever on the center console. Found it. Speed brakes extended, reducing to 250 knots. Excellent. You're doing extremely well. Now, at 50 miles from Shannon, I'm going to talk you through configuring the aircraft for landing. That means extending flaps and landing gear. Are you comfortable with that? Affirmative. But Adrian's mind was racing. She'd flown combat missions where the margin for error was measured in milliseconds. Where a single mistake meant death or international incident. This should be easier. No missiles. No enemy fighters. Just bring the aircraft down smoothly. But in combat, she'd only been responsible for herself. Now, 200 lives depended on her. What if you make a mistake? What if you misjudge the approach? What if? Colonel Kane. The training captain's voice cut through her thoughts. Are you still with me? Roger. I'm here. Your voice changed. Are you all right? Adrian forced herself to breathe. I haven't flown in 2 years. Last time I was in a cockpit, people died because of my mission. I'm just processing. Silence. Then the training captain spoke, and his voice was gentle. Colonel, I don't know what happened on your last mission. But right now, 200 people are alive because you had the courage to walk into this cockpit. You're doing everything right. Trust your training. Trust yourself. Adrian closed her eyes for a moment. Trust yourself. That was the problem. She didn't. But she didn't have a choice. She opened her eyes and focused on the instruments. Roger. I'm ready to continue. The passengers had gone quiet. Not the quiet of calm. The quiet of held breath. Of terror too deep for screaming. Everyone watched the cockpit door like it might open and reveal their fate. In row 32, the businessman in 32D was typing furiously on his phone, texting his wife, his kids, telling them he loved them just in case. The mother in 32A held her children close, whispering stories to keep them calm. The retired military man in row 18 sat with his eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. And in row 6, a young woman named Sarah Chin gripped her armrest and tried not to think about the fact that her entire future, her wedding in 3 weeks, the job she'd just accepted, the life she'd carefully planned, might end in the next 40 minutes. Margaret moved through the cabin, checking seatbelts, offering calm smiles that didn't reach her eyes. A businessman grabbed her arm. How do we know this pilot can actually land the plane? What if she's just saying she can? Margaret looked at him with something close to anger. That woman walked into a cockpit and took control of an aircraft with both pilots unconscious. She didn't hesitate. Didn't panic. Just acted. If you can't trust that, trust this, Reaper doesn't fail. How do you know? Because legends aren't built on lies. British Airways 117, you are 50 miles from Shannon. Begin configuring for landing. Extend flaps to position 5. Adrian found the flap lever. Extended them slowly. The aircraft's nose dipped slightly, speed decreasing. Flaps 5 extended. Good. Now reduce speed to 180 knots and extend landing gear. Adrian hesitated. Once the gear was down, she was committed. No going around. No second chances. You've landed aircraft on carriers. On dirt runways in hostile territory. On damaged airfields under fire. You can land this one. She reached for the gear lever and pulled. A heavy clunk reverberated through the airframe. 3 green lights illuminated on the panel, nose gear, left main gear, right main gear. All down and locked. Landing gear down and locked. 3 green lights. Excellent. Extend flaps to position 20. Adrian complied. The aircraft slowed further, nose dropping more. The Irish coastline appeared on the horizon. Dark green fields. Grey ocean. Shannon Airport in the distance. Emergency vehicles lined the runway, fire trucks, ambulances, police cars with flashing lights. British Airways 117, Shannon Tower. You are cleared to land runway 24. Wind 270 at 12 knots. Emergency services are standing by. Roger, Shannon. British Airways 117 cleared to land runway 24. The training captain's voice was steady. Colonel Kane, you're doing beautifully. At 5 miles, I need you to extend flaps to position 30 and reduce speed to 140 knots. Then we'll talk you through the final approach. Roger. 4 miles. 3 miles. Adrian's hands were steady now. No shaking. No doubt. She'd slipped into the state she used to call the calm, the space where everything slowed down, where her mind processed 1,000 inputs simultaneously, where decisions happened faster than thought. It was the same state she'd been in during 186 combat missions. And it was the same state she'd been in when she fired the weapons that killed 78 innocents. Don't think about that. Focus on the landing. Flaps 30. Speed 140 knots. Perfect. Now, at 1 mile, extend flaps to full, that's position 40. Reduce speed to 130 knots. You'll feel the aircraft slow significantly. 1 mile. Adrian extended the flaps fully. The aircraft's nose pitched up, speed bleeding off rapidly. The runway was directly ahead. Long strip of gray concrete, emergency vehicles lining both sides. 130 knots. On glide path. Outstanding. Now, Colonel, this is the critical part. At 100 feet, I need you to begin your flare, that means pulling back gently on the yoke to raise the nose. Not too much, just enough to change your descent rate. The aircraft will settle onto the runway. Roger. Flare at 100 feet. 50 feet. The runway rising to meet her. 30 feet. 20 feet. 10 feet. Adrian pulled back smoothly on the yoke. The nose came up. The aircraft's descent slowed. The main landing gear kissed the runway with barely a bump. Adrian pulled the throttles to idle and deployed the speed brakes. The aircraft settled onto its nose gear. She applied gentle braking pressure. The 777 slowed smoothly, decelerating from 130 knots to 60, to 30, to taxi speed. She turned off the runway and stopped. British Airways 117 is on the ground. Aircraft secure. For a moment, silence. Then the radio exploded with cheers. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Colonel Kane, that was one of the smoothest landings I've ever seen. Reaper, you just became a legend all over again. In the cabin, the silence broke. People screamed, not in terror but in relief. Strangers hugged. Crying, laughing, shouting in joy. The mother in 32A held her children and sobbed. The businessman in 32D buried his face in his hands. The retired military man in row 18 stood and saluted the empty cockpit. Adrian sat motionless. Hands still on the controls. Breathing slowly. You did it. 200 people alive. Not like the 78. Her hands started shaking again. Delayed reaction. She'd saved them. But the fear hadn't gone away. Margaret appeared in the cockpit doorway, tears streaming down her face. Colonel. You saved us. Adrian looked at her with exhausted eyes. I just did what needed to be done. You're a hero. Adrian shook her head slowly. Heroes don't carry the ghosts I do. When Adrian stepped off the aircraft, the scene was chaos. Irish police. British Airways executives. Aviation investigators. Medical personnel rushing aboard to treat the pilots. And cameras. Dozens of cameras, filming everything. The passengers filed off behind Adrian. Many stopped to hug her, thank her, cry on her shoulder. A middle-aged man grabbed her hand. "You saved my life. I was writing goodbye messages to my kids. Thank you." An elderly woman kissed her cheek. "God sent you to us." A young man, the businessman from 32D, shook her hand with both of his, unable to speak through his tears. Then a small figure broke through the crowd. The little girl from 32A ran forward and threw her arms around Adrian's legs. "You saved us. You're a hero. You're like a superhero." Adrian knelt down so they were eye level. The girl couldn't have been more than 7. Brown eyes wide with wonder. "I'm not a superhero, sweetheart. I'm just a pilot. My daddy told me you're famous. The best pilot in the whole world." Adrian's throat tightened. "Your daddy is very kind. What's your name?" "Emma." "Well, Emma, you were very brave today. I'm proud of you. Can I tell people at school that Reaper saved me?" Adrian smiled despite the exhaustion. "You can tell them whatever you want." Emma hugged her again, then ran back to her mother, who mouthed, "Thank you," with tears streaming down her face. Adrian stood up and found herself facing a wall of microphones. A reporter pushed forward. "Colonel Kane. How does it feel to save 200 lives? How did you stay so calm? Will you fly again? What's next for the legendary Reaper?" Adrian held up a hand. Silence fell. "I did what any pilot would do in that situation. The real heroes are the flight crew who kept everyone calm, and the air traffic controllers who talked me through the approach. I'm just grateful everyone is safe. But Colonel, that's all I have to say." A British Airways executive pushed through. "Colonel Kane, on behalf of British Airways, I want to personally thank you. You saved 200 lives today. We're forever grateful." "The pilots, are they going to be okay?" "Both are stable. They'll make full recoveries. Thanks to you." Then a tall man in a dark suit stepped forward. American. Military bearing. "Colonel Kane, I need to speak with you privately." Adrian recognized the type instantly. Pentagon official. Probably sent to manage the security situation of Reaper going public. She nodded and followed him to a quiet corner. The man was direct. "Colonel, I'm here on behalf of the Department of Defense. Your actions today have created a significant operational security issue. I saved 200 lives. We understand that. But your identity was classified. Your existence was classified. Now every intelligence service in the world knows Reaper is alive and can be reached." Adrian's voice went cold. "Are you telling me I should have let them die?" "Of course not. But there are questions about what you'll say publicly. About missions you flew. About operations that remain. I'm not going to talk about classified missions. I'm retired. I just want to go home." The man studied her. "We can't stop you from existing, Colonel. But we're asking, please be careful what you share. I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to fly. Today I did. Tomorrow I'll go back to being nobody." The man nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, Colonel, what you did today was extraordinary. Not just the flying. The courage it took to step into that cockpit after everything. I read your file. I know about Nightfall." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Don't. All I'm saying is, 78 people died in a mission where the intelligence failed. That wasn't your fault. Today, 200 people lived because you didn't let your past stop you from acting. That matters." He handed her a card. "If you ever need anything. Anything at all." Then he was gone. Adrian stood alone in the chaos, holding a business card she'd probably never use. Margaret appeared beside her. "Colonel. The airline has arranged a hotel for you. And, there's someone who'd like to meet you. A young flight attendant named Jessica. She says you inspired her." Adrian followed Margaret to a quiet room where a young woman in her 20s waited nervously. "Colonel Kane, I wanted to thank you. And tell you that I'm applying to flight school. Because of you. You showed me that the person who saves lives isn't always the one in uniform. Sometimes it's the passenger in 32C who refuses to let people die." Adrian felt tears threatening. She blinked them back. "What's your name?" "Jessica Moore." "Jessica, if you become a pilot, promise me something. Anything. Remember that this job isn't about glory or legends. It's about getting people home safely. Every single time. That's the only thing that matters." Jessica nodded, eyes shining. "I promise." Adrian stood in front of a classroom at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach, Florida. 30 students stared at her with expressions ranging from awe to nervousness. She'd been offered a dozen jobs after Shannon. Airlines wanted her as a consultant, huge salary, minimal work. Defense contractors offered ridiculous amounts of money for her to advise on pilot training programs. 3 networks wanted to buy the rights to her story. She turned them all down. Instead, she took a teaching position. Intro to Aviation. Basic Flight Principles. Nothing classified. Nothing glamorous. Just teaching young people how to fly. On the first day, she wrote her name on the board, Professor Adrian Kane. Then she turned to face the class. "Some of you know who I am. Some of you know my call sign. That doesn't matter here. In this classroom, I'm not Reaper. I'm just a pilot who's going to teach you the fundamentals of flight." A hand went up, a young man, maybe 19. "Professor Kane, is it true you flew 186 missions?" "Yes." "All successful?" Adrian paused. 186 missions where the aircraft came home and the tactical objectives were achieved. But not all successful. "I don't understand." Adrian set down the marker. "I'm going to tell you something I want you to remember for your entire career. I've flown 186 missions. 185 of them, people called perfect. Textbook execution. 0 errors." She looked at each student individually. "But on one mission, I followed my orders perfectly. Did everything right. And 78 innocent people died because the intelligence we relied on was wrong." The classroom went silent. That's the reality of flying. Sometimes you do everything perfectly and tragedy still happens. Your job isn't to be perfect. Your job is to make the best decision you can with the information you have, and live with the consequences. Another hand, a young woman in the back. "How do you live with it?" "Honestly? Some days I don't know. But I'm here. Teaching. Because maybe I can help you avoid the mistakes I made. Or at least prepare you for the weight of this responsibility." A third student, "What about Shannon? The news said you saved 200 people. Is that true?" "Yes." "Were you scared?" Adrian smiled slightly. "Terrified. I hadn't flown in 2 years. I had no idea if I could still do it. But fear doesn't disqualify you from acting. It just means the stakes are real. You feel the fear, acknowledge it, and fly anyway." "How did you stay calm?" "I didn't. I felt everything, the panic, the doubt, the terror. But I didn't let those feelings control the aircraft. I kept my hands steady even though they wanted to shake. I made decisions even though I wasn't sure. I landed the plane even though I was afraid I'd fail." The young woman who asked about living with it raised her hand again. "So being brave means acting even when you're scared?" Being brave means acting even when you're scared and carrying ghosts. Even when you've failed before. Even when you don't trust yourself anymore. You act anyway, because people are depending on you. The class sat in thoughtful silence. Adrian picked up the marker. Now, let's talk about Bernoulli's principle and how wings generate lift. Because before you can save lives, you need to understand why aircraft fly in the first place. Adrian sat in her small office at the university, grading papers, when her email dinged. From Margaret Sullivan. Subject: Thank you, Colonel Kane. I wanted you to know that I've been accepted into flight school. I start training next month. Because of you. You showed me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. You walked into that cockpit carrying demons I can't imagine, and you saved all of us anyway. I don't know if I'll ever be the pilot you are. But I'm going to try. Thank you for giving me the courage to reach for something I didn't think was possible. Margaret. Adrian read the email 3 times, eyes stinging. She typed a response. Margaret. You're going to be an excellent pilot. Not because of me, but because you understand what matters, getting people home safely. Fly well. Fly safe. And remember, legends are just people who chose to act when it mattered. Adrian. She hit send and stared at her desk. The past 9 months had been surreal. The media storm after Shannon lasted for weeks. Passengers from Flight 117 sent letters, emails, gifts. Emma's mother sent a photo of Emma dressed as a pilot for Halloween, with Reaper written on her name tag. But gradually, the attention faded. The news cycle moved on. People stopped recognizing her in coffee shops. And Adrian found she preferred it that way. She stood and walked to the window. The airport was visible in the distance, aircraft taking off and landing in a steady rhythm. For 2 years after nightfall, she couldn't look at aircraft without seeing the faces of the 78 people who died. Now, when she looked at the sky, she saw something different. She saw Emma hugging her legs. She saw Margaret's email. She saw 30 students who listened to her lectures and asked questions and dreamed of flying. She saw 200 people who walked off Flight 117 alive. And slowly, painfully, she was learning to forgive herself for the 78 who didn't. Her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Professor Kane, this is Emma from the plane. My mom helped me write this. I'm 8 now and I told everyone at school about how you saved us. My teacher said I should write you a letter. Can I? I want to be a pilot like you when I grow up. Adrian smiled through tears and typed back. Emma, I would love to receive a letter from you. And yes, you can absolutely be a pilot. Work hard, study math and science, and never stop dreaming. If you need anything, I'm here. Colonel Kane. She set the phone down and looked back at the sky. For 18 years, she'd been Reaper, the ghost, the legend, the pilot who never failed. Then she became the pilot who failed catastrophically and couldn't forgive herself. Now, she was just Adrian Kane. A teacher. A survivor. Someone who carried ghosts but didn't let them stop her from acting when people needed saving. Her office door opened. One of her students, the young woman who'd asked about being brave, stood nervously in the doorway. Professor Kane. Do you have a minute? Of course. Come in. The student sat down, clutching a notebook. I wanted to ask you about something. I've been accepted into the Air Force ROTC program. They want me to train as a pilot. But I'm scared. Scared of what? Of failing. Of making a mistake that gets people killed. After what you told us about your mission, about the 78 people. I can't stop thinking about it. What if I'm not good enough? What if I freeze under pressure? Adrian leaned back in her chair. What's your name? Sarah. Sarah Chen. Sarah, can I tell you something honest? Yes, ma'am. Every good pilot is scared of failing. If you're not scared, you're dangerous. Fear means you understand the stakes. It means you respect the responsibility. But how do you deal with it? You don't eliminate the fear. You fly with it. You make decisions despite it. And if you make a mistake, and you will, because all pilots do, you learn from it and become better. Sarah nodded slowly. What about the guilt? If something goes wrong? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. The guilt never completely goes away. But you learn to carry it differently. You honor the people you couldn't save by saving the ones you can. You turn your failures into lessons. You teach the next generation so they don't make your mistakes. Is that why you're teaching? To make up for. To make meaning from it, Adrian interrupted gently. I can't bring back the 78. But I can make sure future pilots are better prepared, better trained, better equipped to make hard decisions. That's how I live with it. Sarah's eyes were bright with tears. Thank you, Professor. That helps. Sarah. One more thing. Yes. You're going to be a good pilot. I can tell. You ask the right questions. You think about consequences. You care about the responsibility. Those are the qualities that matter most. Sarah smiled and left. Adrian turned back to her window. The sun was setting over the airport, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Aircraft continued their endless dance, taking off, landing, taking off again. And for the first time in 2 years, Adrian felt peace. The auditorium at Embry-Riddle was packed. Adrian stood backstage, heart pounding, hands shaking. She'd faced enemy fighters with less fear than she felt right now. But she'd agreed to do this. One speech. One public appearance. Then back to quiet teaching. The university president finished his introduction, and now, please welcome Professor Adrian Kane, call sign Reaper, to deliver this year's commencement address. Thunderous applause. Adrian walked onto the stage and looked out at 800 faces, graduating aviation students, their families, faculty members. She gripped the podium and began. 2 years ago, I was sitting in seat 32C on a commercial flight, having a panic attack. I hadn't flown in years. I'd walked away from flying because I'd made a mistake, followed orders perfectly and killed 78 innocent people because the intelligence was wrong. The auditorium went silent. I swore I'd never fly again. Never trust myself in a cockpit. Never risk carrying that responsibility. She paused. Then both pilots collapsed from food poisoning at 40,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean. And I had a choice, let 200 people die because I was afraid of failing, or walk into that cockpit and try to save them despite my demons. Adrian looked at the graduating students in the front rows. I chose to act. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than 186 combat missions. Harder than flying into enemy territory. Because this time, I didn't trust myself. I was terrified I'd fail. She smiled slightly. But I landed that plane. And 200 people went home to their families. Spontaneous applause erupted. Adrian waited for it to die down. I'm telling you this because many of you are about to start careers in aviation. Some as pilots. Some as mechanics, engineers, air traffic controllers, flight attendants. All of you will carry immense responsibility for human lives. She gripped the podium harder. And someday, you will face a moment where everything depends on you. Where you're scared, uncertain, doubting yourself. Where the easy choice is to walk away and let someone else handle it. She looked each graduate in the eye. In that moment, I want you to remember something. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's not being perfect or fearless or superhuman. Courage is feeling the fear, acknowledging your doubts, carrying your past failures, and acting anyway because people are depending on you. Her voice softened. You will make mistakes. All pilots do. You will have flights that haunt you. Decisions you wish you could remake. Moments you can't forget. She paused. But you will also have moments where you save lives. Where you make the right call under pressure. Where you get people home safely when everything's going wrong. Adrian stepped back from the podium. Those moments, the ones where you act despite your fear, those are the moments that define you. Not your perfect flights. Not your flawless record. The moments where you refuse to give up, refuse to walk away, refuse to let people die because you're afraid. She looked at the entire graduating class. So go fly. Make mistakes and learn from them. Carry your failures and turn them into wisdom. Face your fears and act anyway. And above all, remember why you're flying, to get people home safely. Every single time. The applause was deafening. Students stood. Then their families. Then the entire auditorium. Adrian stood on the stage, overwhelmed, and saw faces in the crowd. Margaret, who'd just completed flight school. Jessica Moore, now a first officer for a regional airline. Emma, sitting with her parents, waving a sign that said, "Reaper is my hero." The retired military man from row 18 of Flight 117, who'd made the trip specifically to see her speak. And Sarah Chen, graduating at the top of her class, about to begin Air Force pilot training. All of them alive because Adrian had walked into a cockpit 2 years ago and refused to let fear win. After the ceremony, Adrian was surrounded by graduates wanting to shake her hand, take photos, ask questions. One young man, maybe 22, fresh-faced and eager, asked, "Professor Kane, what's the most important thing you've learned about flying?" Adrian thought for a moment. That landing safely matters more than landing perfectly. That getting everyone home alive is worth any amount of personal fear or doubt. And that legends aren't built on perfect missions, they're built on the moments you choose to act despite everything telling you to walk away. Will you ever fly again? Like, as a pilot? Adrian looked at the sky visible through the auditorium windows. I don't know. Maybe. But right now, I'm doing what I need to do, teaching the next generation to be better than I was. Adrian sat in the cockpit of a Cessna 172, hands on the yoke, instructor beside her. She hadn't been in a pilot's seat since Shannon. Hadn't wanted to. Teaching was enough. But Margaret had challenged her, "You tell your students to face their fears. When are you going to face yours?" So here she was. A small airport outside Daytona Beach. A sunny afternoon. A simple training flight. The instructor, a retired airline pilot named Tom, looked at her, "Ready?" Adrian's hands were shaking. "I don't know." "That's honest. Want to talk about it?" "I killed 78 people because I trusted intelligence that was wrong. Then I saved 200 people by landing a plane I'd never flown before. And I don't know which version of me is real." Tom was quiet for a moment. "Maybe they both are. Maybe you're the pilot who made a terrible mistake and the pilot who saved lives. Maybe you're both, and that's okay." "How is that okay?" "Because being human means carrying contradictions. You can be broken and brave. Guilty and heroic. Haunted and hopeful. You don't have to be just one thing." Adrian looked at the runway ahead. "What if I freeze up there? Then we land and try again another day. No pressure. No stakes. Just you and the sky." Adrian took a deep breath. "Okay. Let's fly." She advanced the throttle. The small Cessna accelerated down the runway. At 60 knots, she pulled back gently on the yoke. The aircraft lifted off the ground. And Adrian was flying again. The fear was there, a tight knot in her chest, memories of nightfall and Shannon swirling in her mind. But so was something else. Joy. Pure, simple joy at being airborne. At feeling the aircraft respond to her touch. At seeing the world spread out below. She climbed to 3,000 feet and leveled off. Tom sat quietly, letting her feel the moment. Adrian banked left, then right. Smooth, controlled movements. The Cessna responded perfectly. She wasn't in a stealth bomber penetrating enemy territory. She wasn't in a Boeing 777 full of terrified passengers. She was just a pilot, flying a small plane on a sunny afternoon, feeling the freedom that had made her fall in love with aviation 25 years ago. After 30 minutes, Tom spoke. Want to take her back to the airport? Adrian nodded. She entered the traffic pattern, configured for landing, lined up on the runway. The touchdown was smooth. Gentle. Perfect. She taxied back to the ramp and shut down the engine. Tom looked at her. How do you feel? Adrian sat in silence for a long moment, feeling emotions she couldn't name. Finally, I feel like maybe I can forgive myself. For nightfall. For all of it. For the 78. For walking away. For being terrified on Flight 117. For spending 2 years thinking I was broken. Are you broken? Adrian smiled through tears. Maybe. But I'm also whole. I'm both. And maybe that's enough. Adrian stood in the British Airways terminal at Heathrow Airport, looking at the departure board. Flight 117 to New York. Same route. Same aircraft type. Same seat, 32C. Her hands weren't shaking. She'd made this flight a dozen times in the past year. Teaching opportunities in New York. Conferences. Guest lectures. Each time, it got a little easier. She boarded the aircraft, stowed her bag, and settled into 32C. The businessman in 32D smiled. First time flying? No. But it used to be hard. Why's that? Adrian looked at him. Because I used to be the pilot. Being a passenger means trusting someone else to keep you alive. That's harder than it sounds. You're a pilot. Commercial. Military. Retired. Well, you're braver than me. I'm terrified every time I fly. Adrian smiled. Fear just means you understand the stakes. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. The aircraft pushed back from the gate. Adrian watched through the window as they taxied to the runway. The engine spooled up. The aircraft accelerated. At rotation speed, the nose lifted and they were airborne. Adrian leaned back and closed her eyes. Somewhere in the cockpit, 2 pilots she'd never met were doing their jobs, checking instruments, managing systems, flying the aircraft safely. And Adrian trusted them. Not because she had no fear. But because she'd learned that trust doesn't mean the absence of fear. It means choosing to believe despite it. She thought about the past 3 years. The 78 people she couldn't save. The 200 people she did save. The hundreds of students she'd taught. Margaret, now flying regional jets. Jessica, working toward her captain's rating. Emma, who sent her letters every month about wanting to be a pilot. Sarah Chen, now a second lieutenant in the Air Force, about to begin advanced fighter training. All of them alive and thriving because Adrian had chosen to act despite her demons. The flight attendant came by with drinks. Adrian ordered coffee. As she sipped it, she noticed the flight attendant's name tag, Margaret. Different Margaret. Younger. But the name made Adrian smile. First time flying this route? Adrian asked. No, ma'am. I've been doing it for 6 months. I love this job. What made you become a flight attendant? Margaret's eyes lit up. Actually, I was on a flight 3 years ago where something amazing happened. Both pilots got sick and a passenger, a former military pilot, landed the plane. It was incredible. She saved all of us. After that, I knew I wanted to work in aviation. Adrian's throat tightened. Was it Flight 117? Shannon. Margaret's eyes went wide. Yes. Were you on that flight? I was. Then you know. You saw what she did. Colonel Kane, Reaper. She was incredible. So calm, so competent. I wanted to be like her. Adrian smiled softly. She was terrified, you know. Really? She hadn't flown in years. She was carrying guilt from a past mission. She didn't trust herself. But she acted anyway because people needed her. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. That makes her even more amazing. Being brave when you're scared is harder than being brave when you're confident. That's very wise. Can I tell you a secret? Margaret leaned in. I'm applying to flight school next year. I want to be a pilot. Because of her. Because she showed me that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Adrian felt tears threatening. You're going to be an excellent pilot. How do you know? Because you understand what matters. And because you were inspired by someone who learned courage the hard way. Margaret smiled and moved on to the next passenger. Adrian sat back and looked out the window at the clouds below. She'd spent 18 years as Reaper, the legend, the ghost, the pilot who never failed. Then she became the pilot who failed catastrophically and couldn't forgive herself. Then she became the pilot who saved 200 lives by refusing to let fear win. Now, she was just Adrian Kane. Teacher. Survivor. Work in progress. Someone who carried ghosts but didn't let them stop her from living. Someone who made terrible mistakes and extraordinary saves and learned to accept that she was capable of both. Someone who knew that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, it was about choosing to act with courage despite it. The aircraft flew smoothly toward New York. And in seat 32C, Adrian Kane closed her eyes and finally, truly rested. Not because the guilt was gone. Not because the memories had faded. But because she'd learned to carry them differently. She'd learned that legends aren't built on perfect missions. They're built on the moments you stand up despite your demons and save lives because someone has to and you're the one who can. They're built on teaching the next generation to be braver, wiser, and more compassionate than you were. They're built on the quiet choice to keep trying, keep growing, keep acting with courage even when you're terrified. And as the aircraft carried her across the Atlantic at 40,000 feet, Adrian understood something she'd been searching for since nightfall. She didn't need to be Reaper anymore. She didn't need to be perfect or fearless or legendary. She just needed to be herself, flawed, haunted, but still willing to act when it mattered. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.